Hi, welcome to A Musical Soliloquy, Episode 8. I'm Steven, and I'm here with my co host, Zach. And today we will be talking about all things recording.
That's right. It's an exciting episode because this is a personal passion of mine. I used to really not enjoy recording at all, and now I really do. So, this episode will be broken down into three main parts. Firstly, part one, we'll be talking about recording tips and tricks. We'll be talking about what type of equipment you might want to use, where to record, how to record different repertoire, and recordings versus live performance. Part two, we'll be talking about the mental and the stress that comes with recording and how to cope with that. And in part three, we'll talk a little bit about confidence and how to improve and maintain confidence in daily life.
Sounds good. Why don't we kick things off with part one, recording tips and tricks? Why don't we start with the various different repertoire we often have to record in competitions, from Bach to Mozart to Paganini to concertos to showpieces? Why don't we kick things off with Bach? What types of tips do you have for Bach?
Okay, so one thing that I think is the most important thing to think about when recording Bach, especially for a competition or for an audition pre-screening, is intonation. Intonation, I believe, is number one, the most important thing to have completely solid when recording. Because in a live performance, notes fly by and intonation matters, but to a lesser degree compared to a recording. When people hear something out of tune at the very beginning of your recording, chances are they're just going to skip and they're just going to throw your tape into a pile of discarded tapes, basically. If you start a Bach sonata and your first chord is extremely out of tune, I'm sorry, but you're probably not going to pass to the next round of pre-screening. So that's just how things work. And I think the second most important thing is actually tone quality. I think tone quality and intonation are two of the most important things when recording, in my opinion. And I think that one of the things that I feel I do well is recording for competitions. And I think that because in pre-screening, they are listening less for interpretation. I think they care less about what style of Bach you choose to play, whether it's romantic or more Baroque. I think that as long as you have a good tone and good intonation, I think that you'll go very far. That's my personal take.
That sounds right to me for sure. Yeah, I laughed because intonation seems like a very obvious thing, but sometimes we can forget about it, and it is so true. I feel that it's hard to record because of what you just stated, because we feel like these things are so heavily scrutinized. And I think it's important to remember that they're scrutinized for a good reason and that they just want to be able to see if you have the ability to do these things. And so trying to view it as a good thing, I know is difficult, but I agree that if you start a recording and something goes wrong within the first minute or even 30 seconds, I think it's best to just redo it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, that they're probably going to listen to the first minute for sure, and you don't know if they will listen to more. And I think the honest truth is, yes, the jury members get so many recordings and there's so many players and they have to make a decision. And unfortunately, the only way they can really do that, the easiest way, and honestly, the most practical way, is for them to just listen to the first minute and make a quick decision about a contestant. And you know us, we don't love competitions, but for the sake of competitions and being able to participate and be invited, it is important to make sure that you really nail the beginning. And so it's a slightly different mindset.
I agree. And I actually think when you're on a pre-screening jury, it's not your job. I think most pre-screening juries, they don't feel that it's their job to judge the artistic merit of candidates. I think they feel that they just need to put the people through who have the most technical proficiency, and they've proved that they deserve to be among the 30, 20, or 40, or whatever number of people are in the next round, and usually there's not that many. That's why it's very competitive. And I think that if you play anything out of tune in the first minute, if your tone is ugly or there's a lot of crunchiness to your tone, unfortunately, that probably just won't make it past because a lot of people, the sad reality is a lot of people do edit their recordings. And so, and I don't edit, but I make sure that the first minute of anything that I play is virtually perfect, because if it's not, I know I'm not going to get into anything. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting you brought up editing and how you don't edit because I also do not edit my recordings because I feel like I've actually edited and not gone into stuff and then edited or wait, no, I edited and didn't get in, but then I didn't edit and I did get in. So I think it's better to focus on your actual playing and execution and yes, making sure the first minute is solid rather than to focus on editing.
I agree, and one thing that I will say is for competitions, not to call anybody out, but there are certain competitions in the past that were audio only, where people just go ham on the editing process, because when it's audio only, people are able to splice wherever they wanna splice, more or less, and I remember listening to some people who made it to the competition and hearing them play was almost embarrassing because it was obvious that if they would have played at that level in the recordings, they would not have gotten in for sure. So I think that it's in your best interest to just do your best and accept that whatever level you record at, that's what you sound like. And if it's not where you want it to be, then it's better to put in the work and effort to bring your level to where you want to be so that when you go to a competition, you're not just there and stressed and feeling insecure, but you're bringing the same level of performance. You deserve to be there because you know that, everything that you did was up to par.
That makes so much sense. Yeah. And I'm not saying editing is some terrible thing. I think recording inherently, it's not live performance. It's a sound recording of something that you present, but there is technology involved from the moment you say it's a recording. And so that's something we can maybe get into quickly is the type of microphone and technology you want to use when you're making a recording. Um, I think that we've all learned a lot about mics and mic placement and the halls that you play in. And I think just to start off, you just want to make sure you have a nice, clean video. Phone cameras nowadays work really well and just put it on a nice stable angle where you can see the full range of motion. And what I like to do is I like to go into my school's concert hall or wherever. I like to put a music stand. I put my phone right on the edge of the music stand just so that the cameras are facing out towards the hall. And boom, I got my video. And it's very easy. Make sure your phone is charged up and you have enough space. And just some simple 1080p 30 FPS video will do.
Mm, I've never actually recorded anything with my phone camera because I've been really nervous that I'll get a call and it'll vibrate off the stand, or I don't know. I just have a lot of anxiety in terms of, I actually did record all of my Aspen application videos with my phone though. But besides summer festivals, I've never recorded anything with my phone.
Yeah. If you have a nicer video camera, you should definitely shoot for it. Although that there's the own problems that come with that. Phone is usually really easy, especially for video.
It looks good though. When I see phone camera video, it does everything that you need it to do nowadays. There's nothing wrong with it basically. One small thing that I'll say is you mentioned having clean video, and I think that's actually really important because when people are just looking at a video very briefly, the professionalism that comes across is also very important. If you're wearing a wrinkly shirt or you look disheveled, or if there's a covered piano in the background, or some stands, or some chairs, it just doesn't look as polished. I would just make sure that whatever shows on video looks as polished as possible, because that does make a difference.
That certainly does, yeah. Make sure that you try to get it as horizontal as possible with the hall, that the video is nice and lined up, and make sure there's enough lighting on your face. Make sure the concert lights are open, all these sorts of things, and making sure you don't record on slow-mo. I've done that a few times.
Oh, man. Well, that must have been pretty cinematic. Well, I was just gonna say, you mentioned lighting, and actually for my Menuhin video, that happened during COVID, you were only supposed to record it once, and I forgot to turn on the lights. So my video is super dark, super, super dark, and and I just had to submit that, and I when I got home and I looked at it, I was like, "Uh-oh," but I mean, it was too late, so don't do what I did.
Yeah, these are little things, but when you are a jury member and you're looking at hundreds of videos and you see most of them are very clean, but then you see a couple that are just like weird angles and yeah, not super professional, you'd be surprised how every little thing makes a difference. And so I don't want you to obsess too much about these little things because sometimes you can go overboard and forget about the playing, but definitely make sure that your video is looking good.
Mhm.
Jumping over to audio, that is probably the more important thing, but they are both important, as we were saying. You'd be surprised how good the phone audio is now, but you should definitely get an external microphone. And for violin playing and classical instruments in general, it's best to shoot for a condenser microphone, and especially for violin, a small condenser microphone. I'm not the biggest microphone expert, but what I know about microphones and condenser microphones is that they pick up more detail compared to a dynamic microphone, which we are currently on dynamic microphones, which have a sort of bassier sound that pick up a lot of the frontal noise and they reject a lot of the background noise. And it's good for talking and being present. But when we're
Mhm.
recording for a classical music recording, we want to hear detail. And so I don't know what it is about condenser mics, but they pick up a lot of the fine details in our playing. And we want to pick up as much as possible. Hopefully, the good stuff in our playing. But
Hopefully. And where do you think is the best mic placement, Steven? Because I personally, in halls, I like to put the mic very close to me, because I think that when I've put it out in the hall and I've been playing faster passages, of course, it depends on the space. That's also something we could talk about, the space that you record in. But if it's a very live space and you put the microphone a little farther away, it could sound very muddy on the recording.
yeah, microphone placement is equally as important as the mic itself. I think there is no one size fits all because it depends on the hall and sometimes the instrument. Apparently, some instruments project more upwards, some project more outwards horizontally. And those are really minute details. I think generally you don't want it to be too far away. So maybe 5 feet away, probably no more than 10 feet away. Because especially when you're in a resonant hall, the mic is going to capture that resonance, but what you need the mics for are for that clarity. And the best sound in a classical music recording is a sound that has clarity and also resonance. So
Mhm.
it sounds like you are in a hall, that you're not in a recording studio that sounds completely dead, yet you also
Mhm.
have the clarity of a recording studio. So the professional recordings, they record with one mic up close and they have a hall mic out far to pick up the resonance. And that's even more professional. I think one mic will suffice for a lot of these competitions. You just need to
Mhm.
make sure that you put it, I would say, definitely in front of you, not behind. But in terms of how high it is, that you can play around with. But I think just a little bit angled up is probably fine. Sometimes you have limitations depending on the hall. You can't place it so high. Sometimes it is almost lower. And,
Mhm.
well, you just have to work with it. I don't think it will make a huge difference.
Yes, that's true, and also, with different halls, sometimes there's already recording equipment that you can use. Recently, I recorded at a place that just already had microphones on the ceiling, or not on the ceiling, but hanging from the ceiling, so and those were movable, so I asked them to move them very close. And one thing that I just wanted to touch on is when you do have the microphones very close to your playing, you can't be playing like you normally do in a concert, because when you're playing with orchestra, you're blasting away, and maybe that sound will be incredible for everyone in the hall for a performance, but for a recording, you really have to play for the mic. You have to play for the mic, and you have to be aware of where the microphone is, because it's really easy to sound harsh. I think a lot of the old Heifetz recordings, people think that his sound was harsh, but they put the microphone extremely close to his violin, and he's obviously playing for the hall. I'm sure everyone who's gone to a Heifetz concert has told me that it was the most incredible concert they've ever seen, and I just wish that I could have witnessed that, because I think that I don't know, back then, I'm sure that, it was just common to just place the microphone really close, and I don't know, maybe they had a microphone out in the hall too, but Heifetz has such a focused sound, and it's really good, but you can hear a lot of harshness that comes with that as well, just because of how close the mic is. So I think if people open up your video and the first thing they hear is a bunch of harshness, they probably aren't going to continue listening. So
Yeah, it's a really hard balance because you can kind of cover up a little bit of that harshness if you add reverb in post processing, but then you lose the clarity and you need that clarity too to hear the details. So it really is a balance between, again, the resonance and the clarity. And it's really hard. I think you're totally right about the playing differences of playing in a recording versus an actual performance. We'll jump to that really soon. I guess I'd just like to maybe recommend one or two mics just because we're on this topic. I personally invested in a pair of small condenser microphones recently. I have the Octava MK012 microphones, and I think Rode is a good brand. You can experiment with SM electronics. There's like an SM8 or something. You don't need like the top of the end Neumann KM84s. I know those are nice, but those are like $1,500. And
yeah, so
you can get 90% of it for much cheaper for like $300-400. So a pair of Rode small condenser microphones. You want that stereo pair because I think you get more of that stereo sound, and that will suffice. Or I think cellists often use a large diaphragm condenser, just one, and I think that can be good too. I'm sure you can for violin, but I guess violin is a little bit more higher pitched, so maybe there's that. I used Zoom recorders for a long time. I used the Zoom H1 for a very long time, and that got me into a competition, which is crazy
wow.
because, yeah, I just threw it on and it's like a $100 microphone, and it's honestly more for talking than it is for playing. But it is a condenser it's a stereo microphone, and it was because the hall was good and I guess my placement was not bad, so it had a nice balance. I think their Zoom recorders are good, but if you can and if you have the budget to, it would be great to step up to an actual small condenser microphone. And with those, it's a little bit tricky because you have to get an audio interface as well, and hopefully a portable recorder. And so I actually bought this set from one of my friends who stopped doing music and he sold it to me. And so it came with a Sound Devices Mix Pre audio interface portable recorder. Basically, these expensive microphones, they need some power in order to record. They can't just power themselves. And so these audio interfaces provide power to the microphone. And it's important to get a nice audio interface as well, or else your microphone won't sound good. If you use a not so good audio interface, even if your microphone's good, it's not going to sound too good either. So the Sound Devices is really good that I have, but it's a little pricier. I recommend the Zoom F3 portable field recorder. That one's pretty good. Yeah, microphones are really cool and it's a big rabbit hole and it's really fun to learn about, but you just need the essentials. And I think investing in something nice will just help you make some nice recordings in the long run. So I currently use this pair a lot when I'm recording.
That's amazing. Well, thanks for all your advice, Stephen. You got a lot of knowledge there about microphones.
Thanks.
Yeah, really cool.
Maybe let's jump now to, again, the playing aspect and the differences we were talking about playing in for a recording. I feel like the biggest difference is you can play much softer, and in a recording, you can almost never play too softly. But in a
Yes.
concert hall, sometimes you can actually play too soft.
Yes, that's one of the things I love most about recording because you can literally be barely touching the string and the microphone will still pick it up as long as you have good placement. And I think that's really, you're able to create some truly special colors in your recording. And it's actually kind of a comfort when you're playing to have the feeling that you can never play too softly. So it's a different feeling for sure, but from a concert, but I think that it's a comforting feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you can experiment with playing softer colors if you're preparing for a recording. You should be able to play loud, but you can think about taking everything down maybe a little notch because when you play too loud and you're pushing the violin, you're getting that scratch that will lose itself in the hall. But if you put the recording device close, it's going to pick that scratch up. And so
Mm.
just toning everything down a little bit, and it's amazing how softly the violin can play. And it's hard because as violinists, we are often training to play loud. But what I've been trying to work on a lot in my playing recently is playing softer. And that's a skill that really good violinists have, I think.
I think so too. And so we talked a little bit about Bach. I think in slow movements, tone quality, intonation is really important. I think that one thing that shocked me the first time I played recorded Bach was how much bow changes stand out. So I think trying to be as smooth as possible in the slow movements with bow changes is really good. I think in movements like a fugue, where memory can be a big issue. Even if you feel really solid with your memory, I would just record yourself at home running through the whole thing multiple times so that if you ever have a panic moment in a recording, you can just sit back, and don't engage. Turn your brain off and let your hands do the work because in a recording, oftentimes that can be a stressor that takes a hold. And in the fast movements, I think clarity is really important. And oftentimes, I find that using less bow and more concentration in the sound, little bit more contact with the string can be really good for those fast movements because a lot of the time, just using a little bit more bow like you would in a hall doesn't come through so well on the microphone. It sounds rather messy.
Yeah, I agree with all those tips. I was actually going to mention, I forgot earlier, that Arthur Grumiaux, who's a famous old school violinist, he apparently had a very small sound in the hall, but he sounds amazing in recordings. And I think it's because his way of playing suited the recording so well because he played with always this beautiful, luscious legato sound that was never too much into the string. And he never really cared about projection that much. Yeah. And I think he
Wow.
really obsessed about just making a beautiful sound and phrasing in this kind of a little bit of a box, I guess you could say, but a beautiful one that sounds really good in recordings. And I think that going along with playing soft, I totally feel like when you're recording for a competition, especially in Bach, solo Bach, you can really play around with that. And it's a different type of playing, honestly.
I totally agree. I actually didn't know that about Arthur Grumiaux, but I always thought he had a beautiful sound. So that's really cool.
Yes,
I like his playing.
everyone loves his playing and thinks it's a beautiful sound, but from what I heard, his sound was not very large in the hall. So, were you saying about playing fast Bach movements to be a little bit more condensed with your bow?
Yes, because I think that whenever I play Bach, for instance, the last movement of Bach Sonata 2 A minor, the ya da 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 da, or one of those prestos, ya da 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 da, I think it's really easy to use just a little bit too much bow, and it starts to sound flabby on the recording for some reason.
Mm.
Sounds indistinct, especially in a hall. I think even when you have a mic very close to you, I think that having a little bit more focus in the sound is really important in those fast movements of Bach.
Yeah, that's probably true for sure. I mean, I'm sure it's true. And I think in general, for fast stuff, you should be more condensed. That's one of the big struggles is to think, oh, fast, I got to use more energy. But actually, you have to be even more economic with your movements. And so
Mhm.
that goes along with good playing too. I think a lot of what we're talking about with like good bow changes and good sound and good intonation. A lot of this is just good playing in general. And
Mhm.
it feels like if you record yourself often in your practice and you're noticing these little details, it does translate well to good recording. As we develop and as you develop as an artist and player, it's good to constantly be trying to perfect your playing in these little ways. And it really does come through in a recording. And for a live performance, it takes a little bit more power and stamina. Well, recording takes stamina too, but you have to purposely show it more when you're performing for a live audience to get the message across. But in a recording, it's mainly the sound, I feel. And so, what you can do with the sound, particularly in the soft dynamics, is really going to set you apart.
Yes, because in real life, we never perform for someone who's like 2 feet away from us. It just never happens. So, I think recording is a very different way of playing. It's a different mindset, and it's cool to be able to do that. And it's nice to go back and listen to your old recordings and see how you've improved, and I think that everything that you said earlier, I completely agree with. I think that a lot of aspects of playing, just playing well will translate well to recording. But I almost feel that when you record, there's a huge magnifying glass on everything. Your intonation, what you thought was in tune before, suddenly you hear, uh-oh, every note was not center of pitch. This note was in tune, but a little flat. This note was in tune, but a little sharp. And if it's not 100% consistent, it really comes through on a recording. And it's funny how, as soon as you record yourself, your ears become hypercritical. But when you're playing, or if you hear someone play, you don't notice those things quite as much.
That's so true. Yeah. I, on the flip side, though, a recording can actually make you sound really good sometimes too, though. If you have a really good recording engineer who can bring out the special quality in your sound, and in a live performance, maybe that doesn't quite come across, but in that particular instance, it might come across as being very beautiful. I'm thinking about when I was recording for the Shanghai Isaac Stern competition. I had to do the live rounds as a recording due to the pandemic. So recording was very important. And actually, for that competition and the recording, I used a different bow. And at the time, I was searching for bows and I wanted to find a bow that had a beautiful sound. and I didn't care about projection so much for the competition and because it was a recording. So I played on this bow that was supposedly a Francois Picat bow, but it was a little bit unique in its engraving and design. But it drew out one of the most beautiful sounds I've ever heard on my old instrument, the Johannes Kahrs violin. And I had never heard my violin sound like that before. And it was super beautiful in the recording. It sounded like chocolate. And
Wow.
yeah, it was really awesome because I knew I was just doing a recording for the competition, so I didn't have to play live in the competition. In the If I actually had to play live, it would have been a different story. And it's funny because I played that bow for Mr. Lipset at Aspen after I recorded, and he was like, I don't really like this bow too much. It doesn't really have any projection.
Mm,
And so the bow I ended up buying later and choosing was one that actually had a lot of projection. It has colors too, but it was a complete opposite choice for the recording compared to a live performance.
mhm. That's really an interesting and notable thing that you just mentioned. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Going back to Bach and the style differences, how important do you think it is to stay stylistic to Bach in competitions?
I think that once you make it to the live rounds of competitions, it changes a little bit compared to pre-screening, 'cause, in pre-screening, I think that they don't really care what style of Bach that you do as long as you're playing, at a high level. I think once you make it into the competition, then it depends on the jury that's there. Some people I mean, and you know from competitions, when you go from jury member to jury member, there are people who are like, Bach should never have vibrato, and in my opinion, you should be using a Baroque bow. And then you'll go to the next person, and they're like, in my opinion, I just hate how people don't vibrato Bach anymore. And and it's hilarious because you literally get the polar opposite and you think, "How can these people agree on anything?" And they really can't, and that's the beauty and tragedy of competitions because you end up not knowing what to change about yourself, and really, you maybe shouldn't change so much. If there are obvious flaws that you've noticed and multiple jury members mention about your playing, perhaps you're too tight or your intonation is not so good or you overdo things, and those are things that you can pay attention to. But in terms of stylistic preferences, those are personal things, and I think, in my opinion, it's not so important to conform to whatever the popular norm is.
Yeah, it's tricky. Bach is hard to interpret because some teachers are also really particular about the way you roll the chords in Bach. Some teachers are obsessive about having to bring out the bass note, so you have to play the bass note by itself first before you roll it. And I know our teacher, Mr. Lipset, when he taught me Bach, he was like, no, it sounds better when you play the notes together. It sounds more like a harmony. But some people think
Mhm.
rolling it sounds more like a harmony. So there's so many different approaches to Bach, and I think it evolves as you grow as an artist. But I think just staying true to what is special to you is important, like you were saying. Maybe let's jump over to Paganini. What other maybe important things that are different do you notice?
Well, I think that for Paganini, for me, one good thing is I don't think that I've ever recorded Paganini very well, and I've gotten into quite a few competitions, and so I think that everyone can take solace in the fact that your Paganini doesn't need to be perfect, because I certainly have Paganini that's very far away from being perfect, and I often have been surprised because I've submitted Paganini where I'm like, "Oh my God, this is just," but I don't have another take, I just have to sit. And when I get in, I'm shocked and and happy, of course. But I think that if you can play Paganini really well, that's obviously good. But I think for Paganini, for me, what really helps is just recording. This is what I do. I'm sure everyone has a different thing. But for me, when I'm actually more tired, when I recorded Paganini multiple times, I feel that I have more control over everything and things are less. But that's because when I play, oftentimes I play with a lot of energy, and maybe it's easy to overdo it in Paganini where you're trying to show the virtuosity and everything like that. I feel for Paganini, they basically just wanna see if you can play it and if you have some character. That's what I would say, and, since I haven't been perfect, I can't really give any, tips or tricks on Paganini. I just think that clarity is always important, and intonation, of course, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's awesome to hear as a fellow violinist, and I'm sure many other violinists out there. Um, I think it's because they probably don't listen to Paganini first, unless if you put that first in the video. But a lot of
Yes.
times it's strategic. You can put what you play best in the beginning, and that's what you should do. And so if they have a great impression on you from something else, and then they hear the Paganini, and the first minute of it is pretty solid too. If some stuff doesn't go quite right in the middle, I'm sure they're willing to forgive you. And it's surprising how much that can change just depending on the first impression that you give. Yeah, they just want to see if you can play your instrument at a very highly virtuosic level. And a lot of people use Paganini caprices that they've played for a long time and that they really know. And so I would advise that as well. Play something that you can play well rather than something hard that you can't play as well. And so doing a caprice that you know well is definitely the best choice. I know for me, I don't love Paganini Caprice number 17. I feel like it's kind of repetitive, but I've always been blessed with big hands and I'm able to do the fingered octaves without too much trouble. So other
Uh,
than that section, for me, the rest of the Caprice is not too bad. So I've used it a lot for stuff because
uh
basically, if I can just nail the finger and octave section, I know I'm basically good to go. Whereas Paganini 24, I know I've recorded that a lot, but that's tricky.
That's funny because I actually feel totally opposite. When I recorded, Paganini 17, I thought, "This is so hard," because the octave section is just really scary, and I think that when people listen in 17, if I were listening to 17, I might listen a little bit to the beginning, and then I'm skipping straight to the octaves because I know that's the one thing that people are listening for, and my octaves sure aren't perfect, and I feel for Paganini 24, you get a little bit of everything. I actually started to think of Paganini 24 like a box of chocolates because everyone is kind of short, and it's like a little treat. Everyone's a little bit different, every variation's a little bit different, and I won't talk about Paganini 24 very much because we've talked about it a lot. So, I'm just going to stop talking about it, but I like recording that one basically. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Let's talk about Mozart briefly. Any tips for recording Mozart for competitions?
Well, I think that Mozart, in my opinion, it's what they're looking for is your charm and elegance, and they're looking to see if your versatility. They're looking to see how versatile you are. From if they ask for Bach, Mozart, Paganini in a concerto, which is common, then I think they're looking to see, can you play Bach? Can you play some serious music? Can you play Mozart and capture this charm and elegance? And your sound should change between all of these pieces of repertoire. For Paganini, do you have virtuosity? Do you have a good left hand and a good right hand? For Mozart, I think they're looking for primarily cleanliness, purity of tone. That I think those are the two biggest things. Obviously, intonation is extremely important in Mozart, I would say.
Yeah, Mozart is, as Sloman put it, the hardest thing you can play in a competition, actually, I think, besides maybe Bach, actually. And it's not Paganini. It's just crazy to think. And it's certainly not your concerto, too. I feel that Mozart is so difficult. Actually, that was one of the main reasons why I decided to study with Mr. Sloman, because Mr. Lipset famously focused a lot on concertos and showpieces, and he had less emphasis on sonatas and those duo type of repertoire. And when I went to Mr. Sloman, I was playing the Mozart K454 sonata that you were talking about earlier. And I remember when I played it for Mr. Lipset, he was like, "Oh yeah, Mozart sonatas is a piece of cake. It's nothing compared to the concerto." And then I went to Mr. Sloman and he was like, this Mozart sonata is gonna be the main thing they're gonna judge you on, and this is gonna be the hardest thing you're gonna play because it shows the most about you as an artist. And Isaac Stern famously said that as well, that Mozart is actually the hardest composer to play. And I agree. There's a reason why orchestra auditions always ask for Mozart or Haydn concerto, because that basically tells you all you need to know about you as a player. And I agree with everything you're talking about cleanliness. It's very obvious in Mozart. I'll just add that phrasing is super obvious as well in Mozart because you can play it and it can be a little bit bland. It's just with Mozart, there's always something wrong if it's not a really beautiful and elegant performance. It's super easy to pick out what is not quite right, whether it's intonation, rhythm, phrasing, sound quality, character. It's crazy because you could do literally everything right, and then you can miss that little bit of charm, and it won't convince the judges either. So, I would actually recommend if you're doing a more local competition and you don't have to play Mozart to not choose Mozart ever whenever you're doing a competition, if you had the choice, because
Yes.
you're absolutely better off doing a romantic piece because first of all, you just have way more room for error in a romantic piece. And two, Mozart just is the hardest composer, I believe.
It's hard, and how are you going to impress somebody with Mozart? I've listened to so many Mozart concertos in my life, and I can count on one hand probably one time that I've ever been impressed by a Mozart live, because I think Mozart is so difficult to do, but if you're able to get it right, then you can feel positively charmed and tickled by it. But that's extremely difficult to do because everything needs to be so pristine and everything needs to be exact, and you also need to have this carefree nature of I just I don't care. But everything has to be so perfect. It's really difficult to master, and I think that it is the hardest thing that you have to play. You mentioned Mr. Sloman, which I really love, and one thing that Mr. Sloman told me that I always remember thinking was very profound was mentioned how with Mozart, he thinks of Michelangelo, how Michelangelo said of the statue David when he carved it, that I saw David within the block of marble. He saw the statue within the block of marble, and he just had to take away things that didn't belong to reveal the statue. And he viewed Mozart as the same way. You just have to take away all the things that don't belong. And Mozart, the purity of Mozart and the charm of Mozart, it's all there already in the music, and most of the time we get in the way of that, and I thought that was a very interesting way of looking at things. I do think that you need to be in the right mindset to obviously, if you take everything away, including your emotions, and you just play like a statue, then that's not very interesting either. So, but I think that Mr. Sloman's right, the pristine nature of Mozart, there's more things that we try to add in pursuit of a good interpretation that aren't necessary than there are. Yeah.
I remember that Sloman quote as well. When I was having my trial lesson with him, he actually said the same quote, I believe. And I think it went along the lines of what you said, basically. He was saying, I kept carving until I released the angel or something like that. And he was saying how he saw the angel in the marble beforehand. So he had the picture of what he wanted to create. It was so deep within him, and he just kept carving until he could free that angel and that it could become clear. And I feel that's exactly what we're doing as artists, because everything we want to say is already within us. And we just have to keep carving until God knows how long. But eventually, it will create the angel that we wish to create. And it's really the same with any art. It just takes years and years of repeated practice and performance for string instruments. And yeah, but it's really beautiful because it's all within us. We all have it. It's just about getting to that point where it can really become fully clear and beautiful. And I think, interestingly, you mentioned how Mozart's funny and how you have to maybe strip away some things from Mozart. Interestingly, for me, I actually feel that classical period composers come actually maybe more naturally to me, actually, interestingly enough, because I don't know why. I think I really gravitate towards the classical style. I love how everything is so in a beautiful form, sonata form or whatever, and the harmonies are very predictable, and like the almost in almost every Mozart concerto, the ending is always some trill on a big 5 chord. And yeah, for me, it comes very naturally. It's interesting because I feel like if you're more y- harsh and you're more strong with your emotions, you might have to feel like you have to pull back a little bit with Mozart. For me, I feel like it's just very comfortable for me, actually, in a way. I'm not saying Mozart's super comfortable, but I find that the expression is lies within what I want to express very well. Mozart is one of my favorite composers. I'm sure it is for every musician, but it has always been remained special to me because it just it feels like a language that I want to express and be with all the time.
I love that, Stephen. Sorry, getting me all choked up. Um, yeah, no, I love that. That's really inspiring, actually, because for a long time I felt that Mozart was just so difficult, and I struggled with Mozart so much. It was hard to find the joy in Mozart. And more recently, I feel that I found some of that joy, and I remember you played Mozart Rondo in C major really well at one of your recitals, and I really enjoyed that, and I remember thinking back then that you just understood the natural phrasing of Mozart really well, and it did feel like it came naturally. I've never really seen somebody live play with so much freedom, in Mozart, because I think that's something that's very difficult. So it's inspiring that you are so interested and happy playing Mozart because I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, Mozart."
Yeah. One last thing on Mozart. You mentioned bringing out that funny character in Mozart. And that's interesting because I feel like I can always do a little better job bringing that out. But I feel a lot of violinists, I'm thinking of like Anne-Sophie Mutter or Christian Tetzlaff, they play Mozart very romantically, kind of. And it's with this beautiful sound. And they don't necessarily bring out that funny character as much. So I guess this is why we have different violinists to bring out different characters and different composers. Because Mozart can work so well and it's super operatic and beautiful, and it is also very funny too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, one small thing since you mentioned Christian Tetzlaff is I was completely blown away by how fast his Mozart was when I listened to some of his Mozart concertos. I don't remember if it was number 3 or number 4, but I remember one of them was so incredibly fast. I was shocked, and it worked well for him, but I think it was extremely fast, and it was a daring choice, so I admire him for that, yeah.
Yeah. he has a recording of when he was very young playing Mozart Concerto Number 4, and that was one of my favorite recordings. It introduced me to that concerto kind of, and he played it
Uh,
with so much musical command, and I love the way he played it, just every little phrasing detail. Why don't we finish with concertos and showpieces?
Okay. Well, I think both of these are very similar in my opinion. All the things that we talked about before, but I think concertos and showpieces are the most forgiving things to record because they're longer. So if your first couple minutes are really good and something happens in the middle, no worries. It's going to be fine. And people understand you're playing something that's longer and they're not expecting perfection. They just want to see that you see what you do with it. And for concertos and showpieces, I think you have the most dramatic license, the most license to do whatever you would like to do, phrasing wise, to show your musicality, to show who you are as an artist. And I think that these are the things that stress me out the least.
Mm, totally agree with that. Concerto is your time to shine. It really is your time to show your personality, and especially these romantic concertos, your sound, your passion, and just they want to hear an artist. They want to see someone who has a unique sound. And everyone brings something slightly different to those romantic concertos. And so, yeah, it's really nice. Whereas compared to Bach, Mozart, and Paganini, it feels like there's very specific things that they're looking for. I think in a concerto, it's the most forgiving for sure. And
Hmm.
not to say that it's easy. I think it's not easy to go from Bach to a concerto because they're looking for such different things. And having quick switches is really, really difficult. But I'm hope that through this discussion, we were able to maybe clarify some things about what jury members are looking for in competitions. And yeah, I think it's very structured, and it can be like kind of annoying that you have to go through all these hoops. But ultimately, I feel that it's just trying to help look for the most well rounded players.
Mhm, and I do feel that going through the recording process forces you to look into the mirror and face the person that you are. It's easy to listen to recordings of performances and say, "Oh, well, it sounded better live. This doesn't really capture the essence of my playing." But when you make a recording, what you hear is exactly what other people hear. And it was difficult for me at the beginning when I recorded myself to listen to myself make mistakes and all sorts of things that I didn't like, swells and vibratos being uneven, shifts being really jerky and unsmooth, bow changes being there's a lot of things. There are countless things that I didn't like about my playing, but it's only by listening to yourself carefully that you can change these things and know what to change. And once you start hearing them, you can't unhear them really. So you notice those things more when you listen to yourself as an outsider. Then when you're playing certain things, just you get used to the way that you sound. And so it's actually really a blessing when you have to make a recording to face yourself and to face the person that you are as an artist and improve from there. I
Yeah,
think that is a really
I
powerful.
totally agree. I wanted to transition into the mindset portion of our episode, but I was just curious how you approach actually recording and how many takes you do, because I actually have a interesting way of approaching recording for an audition or whatever. I actually like to do as few takes as possible. And I know it sounds crazy, but often I'll only do like one or two takes for something and just submit it. And not that I get into everything, that I don't, but I just find that I actually play the best in the first one or two takes. And I don't have the best stamina when it comes to playing. So I find that when I get to later takes, it might be more consistent, but the general musical feel was less exciting. And somehow the first one or two takes usually capture the best image of myself. And so I like to view recording like a performance, actually. Or I like to view it like I have one try at it. And I often only do one or two takes. Usually I do at least two because when you do one good take, you always just want to back up, right? But
Mhm.
I often don't do more than two if it's a longer piece. If it's a shorter piece, obviously I can do more takes. But I was just curious what you had to say about that.
I think that's super interesting, Steven, and I actually really admire you for that. That's really cool. It's cool that you view it like that. For me, I'm completely the opposite. The more that I play something, I think the better that I feel and the better that I play. Of course, I get really tired when with recording, and sometimes after finishing a grueling recording session, I come back home and I just lie on my bed and I feel 100% dead. That's the most tiring thing I think that I've done in my entire life. Just recording, you feel like somebody just beat you up for like 2 hours straight. I don't know why it's so tiring, but I think it's because you hold a lot of stress and a lot of tension, and a recording causes me a lot of stress because it's like you play one note out of tune, it's like at least for me, it's kind of like, "Oh, crap." I don't feel that in a live performance at all. I don't worry about that. But in recording, I know, "Oh my goodness, for the rest of my life, every time I listen to this recording, I'm gonna hear that note out of tune." And especially if it's something if you start in the opening is so great, and then you just do something stupid, it feels especially, annoying to me. And so I'm kind of a grinder when it comes to recording. I just record sometimes I remember this one time I went to go record Bach and Paganini 24. I had to record the entire, Bach sonata with no cuts, and that was really painful, and because it was like I wanted to just when I was playing the first movement, I played Bach Sonata number 2. When I was playing the first movement of Bach, I just wanted to keep stopping, like, I'd play one note out of tune or an octave or something like that, and usually if I was just taking one movement, I would just stop and retake it because it's not that long, but I couldn't stop and retake it because then I knew I would be too tired. I just forced myself to keep going, and then, of course, in the fugue, it's really scary if you make a memory slip, then you gotta really go all the way back to the beginning, so that's really scary. So once you get to the end of the fugue, you feel like, "Whew, got that out of the way," and third movement and fourth movement are fairly relaxing, but a little scary because you don't wanna play that fugue again, so, um but I remember I recorded the entire Bach, and then I had Paganini 24 after that, and I was so extremely tired because I only recorded the Bach sonata fully twice because that's all I could do. And I was in but for Paganini 24, I just couldn't play the temps in tune. I kept messing it up. I kept playing different things out of tune every time. So I just sat there and I forced myself to do like 10 takes of Paganini 24, most painful moments of my life. But finally, I ended up getting a take that was perfect. I just refused to go home. I was like, I'm going to just stay here until I get a perfect take. And I felt like, and to this day, that's the only take of Paganini 24 that I've ever felt like was pretty good. And it's kind of sad that I can't do that anymore. But that take was pretty good. I mean, it wasn't, not everything was perfect, but I knew it was good enough. And so that's kind of my recording style. I don't want to say that I force it, but But I'm definitely, especially if it's something solo, if it's something with a duo partner, I don't wanna be difficult and say, "Oh, man, can we do, like, 10 takes of this?" So I usually just do 3 takes. I do 2 or 3 takes of every movement, basically, and typically, my 3rd take or my 2nd take is the best. I almost never ever used a first take of anything. Um, Although for the first time recently, I did use the first take of something, but I almost never use the first take of anything because I just don't play the best then. But when I do solo things, I record it relentlessly. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really interesting. And I thought you would have probably the opposite that I do because a lot of musicians that I talk to are more like you. And I don't think it's anything wrong with that. I feel like if anything, you should try to get as many takes as possible. I just have a different mindset, and we're jumping to kind of the mindset and mental now of just recording. I know that Heifetz famously didn't record many takes at all. He would often use one or two takes, and he actually would rush in concerts because he wanted to finish it earlier. So that's why he kept rushing the orchestra, like you mentioned last episode, because he wanted to get to home early.
That's crazy. Like, I just that yeah, that's actually a crazy
Yeah.
thing.
But I guess my mindset for recording, and it's been getting stronger recently as well, is I have this mindset where I feel like I'm just who I am. And I just feel like if I play basically how I play, then that's really all I'm going for. And I feel like there isn't that huge of a difference between two takes. Oftentimes we think there's a huge difference, but there often isn't. And so I think it's kind of just confidence in knowing that you bring what you bring to the table. Although, if you are preparing for a competition and recording, I would say that obviously, if the first minute is, if something happens there, then you should restart. And I do that. But usually, if I bring a very positive mindset to the recording, usually that doesn't happen. And usually the first minute is fine. And then there's nice moments in between. So I kind of treat recording as like a performance, actually, with the changes of actual approach to the sound that we were talking about. But I try to bring as much life to it as possible. And that's kind of contrary to a lot of what we've been talking about. But for me, that's the mindset that I so far has worked the best because I just find that I don't play super well when I have a lot of the stress on me. And I feel that, especially if you're doing a bunch of takes, I feel like, yes, you might get a take that will be good, but I don't know. For me, it's not worth it. And I'd rather have a take that, yes, it's not perfect, but I just feel like for me, I just play how I play. And I'll work on things in the practice room to get better overall. But yeah, so that's just my mindset, but I know it's different for a lot of people.
I actually really respect that, Stephen, and I think that's one of the healthiest mindsets I've ever heard. I think that's really good. And I think mentally, you're taking a lot of stress off of yourself too. And I really appreciate that because recording is a stressful process and it's easy for us to be really hard on ourselves. And know for me, I don't like beat myself up after I finish recording, but during the recording process, I feel like I'm extremely intense and I'm like, this has to be perfect. This has to be perfect, you know? And I don't feel that way in terms of anything else really, and I don't like that mindset. I like the feeling of being free in a performance, and I don't think that perfection really matters that much. But I think there's a lot of pressure in making recording, like I mentioned before, just because it's permanent. So I feel that everything needs to be perfect. Otherwise, it's forever imprinted in time. Like I missed this and I missed that, and and there's nothing to be done, basically.
That makes sense. Absolutely. I just feel that, I mean, everything you do is imprinted in time, technically, right? That's true.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
totally right.
I mean, even a live performance, if it's not recorded, nothing is not recorded nowadays. Everything is recorded. Any like somewhat important performance. Yeah, that's interesting because I've certainly been nervous for recordings and been like, oh, I don't want to mess this up. But just more recently, I've just kind of treated it as not too different as from a performance. And I feel like I'm kind of the opposite extreme where I feel like sometimes I'm not as critical of myself as I should in certain times. And I feel like Obviously, that's not the best thing either, but for me, I would rather do that than be ultra critical because, yeah, I can't play super well when it's like that. And I think it's kind of
Mm,
crazy that although you really agree with the mindset I have, that you're still able to record even with a lot of that sort of pressure on you. Because for me, I've just come kind of come to a peace with my playing, I guess, because I just know that no matter the situation, I'm going to play how I'm going to play. And I find that I try to draw inspiration from other things. And a recording is actually a very exciting and a great opportunity to present yourself. And I try to draw inspiration in just the process and performing. And yeah, I try to think as little as possible about the actual recording process. And it becomes a lot of fun. I feel that I have a lot of fun when I record, actually.
I love that, Stephen. I think that anyone listening to this segment should adapt Stephen's method of and mindset of recording. That'll alleviate a lot of stress, actually, because I think my mindset causes me a lot of stress. And actually, I think recording is the most stressful thing that I can think of in terms of things to do. Because, I mean, I like recording too. I mean, it always but I always feel like every time I record something, I'm like, "This has to be really good," you know, like, it's gotta be perfect, or it's gotta be more perfect than what I recorded before, and I always feel nervous for recordings because it's like, it's it's, uh, it's a check-in with yourself, you know? There's no hiding on a recording. If you sound bad, you sound bad, and then I have to say, "Oh my god, I sound bad," and and that's not a super enjoyable thing listening to myself and thinking, oh my goodness. But I really appreciate the fact that, what you're saying about, like, how you play is how you play, and it's true, it's true. It's good to always hold yourself to a high standard, but it's also not good to constantly put pressure on yourself and force yourself. We're all looking for an unrealistic ideal, really, and music, like you said, isn't about perfection, and it's easy to forget that. It's easy to forget that, and it's yeah.
Yeah, this is along the lines of doing orchestral excerpts because recording for an orchestra audition to get into the first round if you aren't invited is like this. You just got to keep doing it until it's perfect. And same with playing a live orchestral audition.
Mhm,
You get a couple seconds to play your excerpt perfectly. I've struggled with that a lot in the auditions that I've taken, but again, I've come to more of a peace in that I know that what I bring to the table, and I just know that if something doesn't go well, there's probably a reason why it didn't go well, and there's something that I can continue to work on. And so I don't view that as a stress because I feel like I can just, it's a learning experience. And if anything, I should be grateful that I'm learned that because a lot of times, all the time actually, when you perform, you learn things about yourself that you didn't before. Something feels not great because when
mhm,
you're in a recording or audition, it is the most intense time. And oftentimes, when I experimented with like different postures or whatever, it would feel totally fine when I was practicing because in the comfort of my home. But then when I went to the audition or whatever, it felt super uncomfortable. And that's a sign that something might need to change. And it's always evolving a lot of the time. But I remember one time when I was playing without shoulder rest for like a year, like 3 years ago, I was doing that and it was not bad. And then I took the Chicago Symphony audition and I played with the pads that I was using, but on stage it felt really, really bad. And I missed this big shift in Debussy La Mer excerpt that I felt like got me cut. It was probably other things too, but it was mainly that I felt. And then I'd like put the shoulder rest back on like immediately after. And that's something like you only learn through the actual process of doing it. And so just not being afraid of it. I feel that when we're afraid of things, we tend to be reserved and we don't express the full potential of what we want to express. But it's funny that I mentioned that because fast forward like 2 years later, I'm not using shoulder rest again for now, at least.
Yeah, that's cool, and I like what you mentioned about fear because I literally just saw this quote from some guy, and, he was saying how fear is the enemy of creativity. And anytime you're trying to do something creative in art, you can't be afraid because if you're afraid, then you won't have the courage to make the decisions that you need to make in order to try new things. If you're afraid of failure and of any sense, then you'll play it safe and you'll basically do the opposite of being creative. And that's true. When you're playing on stage and you feel uncomfortable with the piece, or if I'm worried that I'll have a memory slip, or I'm worried that I'll play something out of tune, then instead of thinking about what I'm doing creatively or musically, I'm thinking about something technical and something very normal. And I think that a lot of notes get left unsung.
Yeah. It's hard because when you get that in the moment feeling of panic or fear, it's hard to know how to cope with that. And that's when our
Mhm.
bodies have that fight or flight mechanism where we tense up, and that's where we often lose control or start to rush or whatever. And I think it's important. It's really hard for everyone, but just training those moments, even off stage, of just learning how to put that mindset away and just accept that it is just going to be how it's going to be. And you're just going to learn from it. You're going to maybe do something that you never thought you would do. And it'll be a big learning experience. Yeah, we're all striving for this ideal. And it's great to be able to play at this very high level. But again, going back to Mr. Sloman's quote, we have to realize that we have the ability to do whatever it is we want to do. And we have that already in us. Again, the angel was already seen as he was carving the marble, or even before he started. But we just have to go through the process of getting to that point. And it's going to take however long it's going to take. And no one can say exactly how long that is going to be. But I feel like as a society, we are very goal driven and we like to have things that we can say are really good. Like, I have a good this, I have that, I'm able to achieve this or that. But again, life and art is an ever growing and ever evolving process. And it never truly ends, really. It's really important to bring that out and focus on that as an artist.
Yeah, I really love that. Those are all excellent points. One thing that I was thinking about while you said that is it's a good thing that we care so much, actually, because we care because we've put a lot of effort into what we do. When you care about something and you feel nervous on stage, you won't really feel nervous doing something you don't care about. If somebody gives you a pancake and they're like, you've got to flip this 10 times, like, that's a random example, but you're not going to feel nervous doing something that you don't care about or that you haven't practiced. And so I think when you're put under pressure doing something that you really care about, it's natural to feel nervous and it's natural to care. But one thing that I've been thinking about lately is in life, we always feel scared to take risks, to make decisions that we feel could potentially be embarrassing or things that won't turn out the way we want. But really, if you view life kind of like a video game, in a video game, you're fearless because you know that no matter what happens, you're going to be fine. And I think that in life, most of the time, no matter what happens, you're gonna be fine too, especially when you're playing violin, because even if you have the most catastrophic performance of all time, you're gonna be fine. It's not something that's going to cause the end of the world, or it's not gonna be a big deal, actually. It will feel like a big deal, maybe for a while, but I don't think that the risks outweigh the cost, I think. If you live in a straitjacket for the rest of your life because you're unwilling or afraid to take risks, I think that you'll live to regret that, basically.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's important to be grateful because, again, we keep trying to achieve all these next goals and be able to play this well and whatever. And we fail to realize how far we've come already and just be grateful for that because we've already solved so many problems. We're really bold again for embarking on this path that really is very difficult. And for people that have achieved quote unquote success in the field, it's important for them to also realize what got them there and how they can continue to keep evolving because I think that everyone has their own journey. And for some people, they're going to achieve this at this certain age. But for other people, they're going to do other things and it's going to be equally beautiful in a different way. And we should stop trying to put ourselves into other people's ideals. But I know that's what a lot of society is. And people feel the pressure to do that because of societal standards. But as artists, especially, we're so much beyond that, or at least we should. And every human being should, but especially as an artist. But I feel that in our classical music world, just like the world, we're very much bound by a lot of worldly standards.
I love everything that you just mentioned, and I think that leads perfectly into confidence as a topic because I think exactly what you mentioned, looking at how far you've come as a musician, we've all come so far from the moments that we started. I mean, you start not being able to even play a song. And then you get to a point where you're memorizing complex pieces that are literally 40 minutes long. And you know exactly, it's like magic because the fingerboard is blank. How do you even know where to shift? I think about that sometimes and it's like kind of crazy. It's like, wow, I don't even know how I know where this is. And it's amazing. Violin is an extremely technical instrument, and to not only be able to play all the notes, but be able to phrase and think about how you're using your bow and vibrato, it's actually really amazing. And thinking about that gives me a feeling of comfort and peace because we really all have come extremely far. No matter where you feel that you're, no matter what level you feel like you're at personally, you're already pretty amazing for being able to do anything on the instrument. And I think that, like we talked about in previous episodes, what matters isn't technical perfection, but your ability to express. And if you're able to channel your emotions and your feelings and your thoughts into your music, then you've already achieved a great deal.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's beautiful, the act of playing an instrument, because it is at the end of the day offering something really beautiful and it's really unique. Not a lot of people are blessed with musical talent, actually, not the majority of people. And of course, society needs many other things to function, not just music, but art is a fundamental part of our society. And realizing that we are so blessed to be able to play an instrument and even at a high level, if that's where you're at, it is a blessing that you shouldn't take for granted ever and that you should carry on. And yeah, we can never forget that we're doing something that is greater than what we think it is. With that, let's jump to our practice tip of the week.
Okay, well, the practice tip of the week relates directly to noodly passages, such as those found in Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto First Movement, among many other things. One thing that I found that has helped not only me, but a lot of my students recently is practicing Schradik. Whenever a student has a passage that has a lot of runs, I recommend Schradik immediately because when I was playing Tchaikovsky, I found that my finger dexterity wasn't as great as I wanted it to be. And one of the practice tips from before, practicing with light fingers, it was difficult to practice with light fingers because when you're shifting all over the place and everything's super fast, you want to grip on really tight. And I've been practicing a lot of Schradik recently, and I think even just the first exercise in Schradik book is so great, and you feel like even now, all these fourth fingers don't feel great to me, and it's amazing that after all these years of playing, that something as simple as Shraddick can still be difficult, and there's so much to improve and think about there. I love Shraddick because I think the guy who wrote Shraddick, well, Shraddick himself was just a genius because it's hard to think of exercises that are so ingenious and they go to different positions and it puts your hand in all different types of hand frames. And what I like to do with Shraddick is I like to practice 4 notes to a bow and then 8 notes to each bow, and then I'll do the whole measure as 1 bow, and then if it's like a whole usually then you do the whole thing, like, either in 1 bow or 2 bows, and I think that's pretty good, and of course, every time get a little bit faster. I find that extremely helpful.
Yeah, that's a great practice tip. Go back to the basics in Shradiak. Yeah, Shradiak is key for violin playing. Heifetz famously played the first page of Shradiak every day as his warm up. And so they say,
Whoa!
yeah, if Heifetz did it, then every violinist should do it. And it's true. I actually do a variation on the Shradiak exercise. I do it with the normal printed A major, but then I do it with the low 2 and also with the high 3. And I do it on
Mm.
each string and in different positions, just using the open string. It doesn't really make sense past like fifth position, but you can do it in third position because you're training your hand frame in each position. And going even further for a practice tip I'll save in a future episode. What really helped me in addition to Shradiak was doing trill exercises that, again, Nathan Cole taught in one of his videos. And Shradiak is similar to that because it's training your hand and finger placement. But yeah, I'll just give a quick sneak peek to that practice tip, which is that you need to train it like a hot potato. You need to put the finger down quickly and then prepare in your mind for the next finger. And you can practice Shradiak like that in rhythms. Ba da dee da dee da 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 dum. Something like that. And the trill exercises. That's all about improving your finger dexterity. And
Great.
Nathan Cole talked about how when you get older, he actually feels like he can play faster because he's trained and made economic decisions on what to do with the hand. So actually, he's playing very fast because he's only moving what's necessary. So I totally agree.
Well, that sounds amazing. Wow, really cool. I guess let's jump into the recording of the week. What's the recommendation, Steven?
The recommendation for a recording of this week, the RRW, is
Waru.
yes, is Glenn Dicterow's Brahms Double Concerto for violin and cello with Carter Bray and the New York Philharmonic.
Wow.
I mentioned I had a relationship with Mr. Dicterow because I auditioned for USC, which I'm actually wearing the sweater today.
Nice. That's a
And
nice city.
didn't get to study with him officially, but I worked with him throughout 3 summers at Music Academy. And I think that Mr. Dicterow has a very personal and unique sound. And he has a special relationship to the New York Philharmonic because he was concertmaster for 34 or 2 years there. So Obviously, he knows the orchestra so well, and he has a full album of all his recordings of solo performances he's made with the New York Philharmonic.
Whoa.
Yeah, and in there is Shostakovich Concerto, Korngold, Bruch, a lot of the big ones. And so, as a concertmaster, you don't take these solo performances lightly. At least he didn't as a soloist himself. And this Brahms double concerto is so amazing because both him and Carter Bray are the principals of the orchestra. And he just has a humongous, rich sound on the violin, and he's playing on the Guarneri Bel Jesu violin, and it just is so rich, particularly the second movement when you have the theme on the G string. He just gets such a rich sound there for Brahms, and I know Brahms is one of his favorite composers. Also, he just has a virtuosity to his playing. He also studied with Heifetz that is unique to him. We talked about Will Hagen last episode. It's similar to that. It's just this amazingly intense and hugely virtuosic sound. And I cannot recommend that recording enough. Actually, I thought of one more recording I'll just throw in there is his Bernstein Serenade for orchestra and solo violin. It's in that same album, and he made one recording with a different conductor. He made two recordings of it, but his recording of that piece is also phenomenal. One of the best interpretations of that piece I've ever heard. And he is a true soloist, and he can command the stage and the solo spotlight totally. And yeah, he really could have been a soloist, but he chose to be concertmaster.
Which is also amazing. That's super cool. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that wonderful recommendation, Stephen. I'm excited to check that out. I'm excited to check out the Bernstein Serenade as well. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, I think he really owns those romantic concertos. Brahms, Bruch, Korngold, Shostakovich, anything like that, I would recommend. But I just thought of the Brahms because that one is kind of cool because of just his history with the orchestra and working with Carter Bray as well.
Really cool. Well, thank you, Stephen. And I guess that wraps up today's episode. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.